Yo,
Welcome, Derrick. Thank you so much for being here, hermano. Appreciate you.
yeah, thank you for having me, brother. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you some more and talk and share.
Yes, man. Thank you so much. Today we're going to talk about how to opt out the technocratic state. We're also going to talk about new forms of economy and building systems in order to become self-sufficient, independent from governments, corporations, and overall this plutocratic system that basically is enslaving us. We have some solutions. You wrote the book, How to Opt Out the Technocratic State, and there's a lot of information there that we want to get into, as well as the action that we can take right now in terms of economy basically is one of the biggest factors. And so before we get into all this, this is very important information and really in depth, but how is it, this is a question, how is it that you got into this? What is your motor, what is your energy that made you realize what's happening in the world? And also, what is it that helped you take that first action? I was like, researching, finding out, and then living the life of becoming self-sufficient, really resilient, and not depending on these corporations. So that's how did you get into this?
Well, thank you for that, brother. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, yeah, I hear you, brother.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, so I mean that's a big question, right? I think that each of us have our own journeys, and maybe there's different parts of the journey that different things that contribute. I could point to a few different things. I mean, I could definitely say one of the things that set me on this path would be experimenting with psychedelics when I was younger. Another would be kind of listening to metal and punk growing up and having like an anti-government, anti-authority sort of foundation. Not any deep understanding, but yeah, like, screw the police, F the government, kind of like young punk teenage mentality. Like all those things sort of, I think, allowed me to, when I finally came across information and watched some documentaries and read some books, which I read a book called Rule by Secrecy by journalist Jim Marrs. He's now passed away, and that really opened my eyes a lot. I was listening to this metal band called Molotov Solution that was talking about the Federal Reserve and talking about central banking, and that was influencing me. And then I heard Ron Paul speak in Texas at the University of Houston. That was kind of another thing. But even prior to all that stuff, I think the big thing, of course, would be for me in my life. I got addicted to drugs at a young age, starting when I was pretty much 18, started drinking all the time. And then by the time I was 20, I started using crystal meth and ended up homeless, living in a crack meth house for a little while, and then becoming a dealer and getting wrapped up into that whole world, and then eventually getting myself sober, but getting arrested in the process and going to prison. And so I was November 2005 when I got locked up, a couple of weeks before I turned 21. And that was really the big thing, because from there, once I got locked up, and once I realized I wasn't going home for at least a year, my family, both mom's side and father's side, are full of drug and alcohol abuse. Like on the Hispanic side of my family, my mom's side, like all my uncles, alcoholics, and it was a very regular thing. And on my father's side, alcohol, but for him, my dad was a drug addict, and I grew up visiting him in prison, and just even before I knew what a drug was, I was hearing that word in my household just because it was just constantly, a conversation. So when I got locked up for drugs and realized that I was sort of going down the same path as my father and as other family members, and I decided I wanted to change things and I wanted to use the time I had. The first sentence I got was 11 months, so I was locked up for 11 months, and then I got out for 5, and then I went back for another 3 months, and then I was out for about a year, and then they sent me back for the final 4 months once I actually got my felony. So all together, I did about 18 months, and then I got out, did a few months on parole. By June 2009, I was over and done, and just through this crazy experience from 2005 till 2009 in my early 20s, just trying to figure out, do my healing work. While I was locked up, I started doing a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation, and journaling, and trying to understand my relationship with my father. Like those are the things that really, I think, that in combination with what I said, like trying psychedelics, kind of being anti-government because I was a young punk, and just these sort of things, all of that together, once I got out of prison and my depression, which was like really the root of my drug use, I was basically trying to self-medicate. Once the depression and like a lot of the chaos I was going through, all that stuff had disappeared, and I was out now 23 years old, living in the city, and it felt like I had just been born for the first time. And I know that kind of sounds silly maybe to some people, but it felt like I was just waking up, like truly waking up, and just happy for the first time in my life. Even though I was now a felon and I had all these roadblocks in front of me, I was just so excited to be free, to be out, to be making my own decisions, and to be sober. And it was in that space that I started to open my mind to like, okay, well, what else is going on in the world that I've just been blind to and haven't been paying attention? And that's when I ran into some of those books and documentaries, and that was 2010. And it's been 14 years now since then. But yeah, I don't know if I would be on this path if I hadn't gone through all that.
Gotcha, man. So, quick question. So you took psychedelics before you got into hard drugs like meth and all that, right? So I want to get that straight.
It was all at the same time, man. I mean, like I started
Okay.
experimenting with mushrooms in high school, and I knew that I had respect for mushrooms and even for acid, like, but not completely like I do now. I just knew I was like, there's something powerful there. But when I got out of high school, I mean, I was doing meth and acid together. I was doing coke and meth and acid together. I was just, we were going crazy. And so I definitely, even in those dark times though, like, I mean, for example, when I was living in that crack house I mentioned, when I realized I wanted to be sober, I told everybody around me, please don't offer me drugs anymore. Like, I don't want to do anything. I'm trying to get sober. And everybody around me was smoking crack or smoking meth, but they at least left me alone. And I swear to you, I was living in this little room under the stairs, like freaking Harry Potter or something. And I was just sleeping there. I had nowhere to go because I'd burned all my bridges. My car was outside, but I literally just had nowhere to go, and I didn't have any money or anything. And I just started taking mushrooms and acid and like smoking cannabis. Cannabis helped me get sober off crystal for sure. And I was like, the medicine was showing me like where I was headed. Like I got so many warnings that only now, of course, like with hindsight, I was like, oh man, that's what the warning was about. I saw myself in the future like homeless and like just it was the first time I realized how skinny I'd gotten. I'm already kind of a thin guy, but when I was on meth, I was very, very skinny. And so the medicines were helping me even throughout that chaotic time. But it wasn't really till after I got out of prison that I started to really have that respect and true understanding of their power.
Understood. So just to rephrase, we're talking about that there was some type of messages from psychedelics that was being interfered by other drugs. I just want to clarify that because there's a lot of confusion about psychedelics helping people or otherwise taking people down the road to drug abuse and that. So I want to clarify that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I don't think that, I mean, I wasn't using psychedelics in a healthy way. I'm definitely able to, can confidently say that because I was selling a lot of acid too, and so I was constantly dealing with like jars and jars of like pure acid and getting it on my fingers. And I mean, this is part of my problem that time, and I was kind of in like I was losing touch with reality because there's maybe for some people it sounds a little extreme, and I don't really talk about this too much, but I will be writing a book about this whole thing in 2025. It'll be the 20th anniversary of my arrest. That for some people they got like party in high school or college or whatever, and they're the kind of people that just on the weekends they have a beer, or maybe they take Molly, or they do something out of the ordinary, right? Or they smoke weed at the most. But when you start to do that on like a daily basis and your house becomes the party house, like it's no longer just a weekend thing. It's like a 24/7 like cycle you're in, and then you start to lose sleep, and then you start to like be unhealthy, and then all that kind of builds on top of each other, especially when you're around other human beings. Paranoia seeps in, like these other substances really can get into the dark sides of our trauma and really use that against you. And so it was definitely like some heavy times, but I'd say psychedelics were sort of like a bright spot in there trying to like show me a way out, but I just wasn't quite ready for it yet.
Gotcha, man. Thank you so much for sharing. I relate with you so much in so many ways. I think we shared with you when we saw each other earlier this year. And this means that I personally went through something similar, very heavy, family related as well. And then the question here is when you came out of this, you start opening up to what the reality is and what life is about. Then you come across what's happening in the world. This control over doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of contamination, destruction. There's unhealthy lifestyles all over. You start finding out about this, and don't you go back to depression again, or being mad, like I was a certain period of my time, it was like I was in so much anger, of course depression and everything, but there was a phase of anger, nobody wanted to be around me and stuff like that. Like, tell me what's up, what's about with you.
Yeah, no, I definitely remember that period. So as I said, like I got out, I was actually at the library all the time because for anybody who knows, in the U.S., when you get a felony, you basically can't get a job in a lot of places. You can't get rented a lot of places. So I was at the library all the time. I didn't have my own laptop or anything. I was fresh out of prison, and I was just going there applying for jobs. And then one day I decided, like, hey, why don't I read some of these books here? And I was really drawn to this book called Cannabis: A History, and it was really interesting to me because it was not just like a book about how great weed is. It was really about like the sociological impact, the psychological impact, the spiritual impact, and then the legal history of cannabis as a plant. It was a really amazing book, and it taught me things that I wasn't taught in high school. For example, that in the United States, like the first drug laws that were passed in 1914, the Harrison Act, that they were largely based on racism against Chinese migrant workers, Mexican migrant workers, and then of course you had the hemp industry and the oil industry the oil industry trying to push out the hemp industry and all kinds of things like that. And that was just like it was the first book I ever voluntarily took notes on, just because I was so like, wow, this is really powerful stuff and it's so intriguing, and how come nobody ever told me this? And that just sort of set a light bulb off my head that allowed me, I think, to then move into the space of like, all right, I'm going to go down some of these rabbit holes. And then, I truly believe that this is creator just in so many ways, just guiding like each of us. But for me, I definitely can see like the hand of the creator, because, another thing that happened was as I was coming out into Houston, I'm living in downtown and I'm starting to get involved in the music and art scene. I've always been a promoter, so organizing festivals and music and stuff. And so I was starting to put on benefit shows like anti-war shows and domestic violence awareness and just things like that. It was my way of starting to get involved. And I was at a festival one time, and somebody just was passing out these stickers, and I saw the sticker, and it was something about 9/11, and I didn't really think much of it. I thought it sounded cool, and I took it home, and I put it on my keyboard in my music room, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then a few months later, and this would have been 2009, 2010, I looked it up. I looked at it, and I was like, 9/11 is an inside job. That's interesting. And it had Infowars.com on it, and so I started, that was like tumbling down the rabbit hole, right? And so, in that, and when I started to go down those rabbit holes, like you said, I started to tell everybody, like, oh my God, how come people don't see this? Like, what the heck? Am I the only one? And yeah, after a while, you drive away all your friends and family. And I had about 2 or 3 friends who didn't think I was crazy, and then we started an activist group called the Houston Freethinkers in 2010, and we were very active for about 8 years. Protests, rallies, community garden building, house shows, art shows, podcast. Just, we were doing anything we could in the city to try to focus on solutions. But besides that, though, everybody else thought I lost my mind for sure. Like everybody else thought okay, you're out of prison, at least he's not on drugs, but now he's lost his mind, was sort of the thoughts.
For sure, man. I got you. Thank you for sharing. So basically, going through this whole process and learning the different solutions, the different actions that others have been doing around the world for many years. That not many, but definitely has been that has been inspiring us. Now we feel like we've been understanding that one of the biggest actions that we can take right now is to change our economic system or create a new one, so we don't give more power to this big corporation, to the elite, and all these institutions that just want to take more power and keep controlling us, stealing our data and all this stuff. So these becoming one of our actions, how is it that we cannot be participating with the bank anymore? Please tell us some examples of like how to start even thinking about it, to then taking the action of that. Like, how is it possible?
Yeah, sure. So, again, like when I was starting the Houston Freethinkers, it was 2010, 2011. And at that time, for those who might remember, the Occupy movement launched in the United States, but then all around the world, there was Occupy chapters, everywhere. And there was an Occupy Houston chapter, which is where I'm originally from. And we were doing the Houston Freethinkers, kind of doing our own thing, and Occupy popped up. And we were mainly focused on, at the time, like our protests were what I would consider to be reactive, which is like what most activism tends to be. So, for example, we would go 2 or 3 times a week to the local Federal Reserve Bank and hold signs outside the building and yell at the building and pass out flyers to people passing by and trying to say like, hey, pay attention, these people are robbing you blind, and we need a new system. And we knew that we needed something new, but we didn't really have any concrete ideas, or just we knew, of course, like barter networks and things like that. So we were already kind of promoting some of those locally, but there was also at the time people Occupy again talking about the Wall Street and the banks, and so there was so much conversation going around about that. Like the big banks are robbing people through all kinds of financial instruments. The Federal Reserve is creating fiat currency with inflation, and that's devaluing the currencies, not just the Federal Reserve, but central banks all around the world. So what do we do? And at the time, one of the main solutions that the people I was working with were promoting was like using silver, small amounts of silver, like, hey, let's all start accepting silver for our businesses and trying to get out of those mainstream systems. Other people were doing things like divesting from banks, so they would, in groups, like big groups, go together and let's all close down our Chase accounts together, our Bank of America accounts. And not only does that send a message, but the idea being like, why should we keep supporting these institutions that are robbing people all over the world and responsible for all kinds of horrible things and funding wars and violence, et cetera, et cetera. So everybody understood that there was a problem, but unfortunately, like most of the modern people in our world are very entrenched and ingrained in that system. So many people have direct deposit for a dozen or more things that automatically deduct from a bank account and pay their bills on a certain day. It makes it easier. They don't have to worry about it. And the idea of not doing that, or having to pay your own bills, or do it some other method, or just change your habits, is very scary for a lot of people. At least in the United States, I'll say people are afraid of change, even if they know the things they're doing aren't going to help them in the near term or the future. It's very difficult for us to change sometimes as human beings. So, we were promoting using silver, and at that time, of course, 2011, 2010 was the very beginning of things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general. I haven't used a bank account since 2008, even prior to when I was kind of waking up, because I was in prison, and so like I started a bank account I think when I was 18, and then I never really kept up with it, and then I just started getting into drugs and all that stuff. By the time I got out, I woke up and I basically realized, like, you know what? I haven't had a bank account yet. I think I'll just stop going to that system. And I started living my life in a way that I was either, for a while I was getting paid cash for some jobs that I was doing. I was doing a lot of like kind of freelance type stuff. Then when I started working at a restaurant, I had a check, so I had to figure out how to do that. I'm having to go to like check cashing places, and they're taking out a lot of my money. Like I'm not saying this is an easy road to navigate, but I do write about it in my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, trying to give people some examples from my own life, but more importantly for us to start thinking about what do resilient or regenerative systems look like, right? Because, for me, a big part of the goal is to get out of their systems because we know they're destructive, we know they're not helpful. But that's not the final solution, right? Just getting out of a bad system isn't the solution. The solution would be getting out of a bad system, creating, building, and or participating in a better system that has the values and things that we want, whatever that may be when it comes to money and currency. So I don't think that we have created whatever the next solution is going to be just yet. I do think tools like crypto, particularly Bitcoin and Monero, when done in a private way, can allow people to move money around and hold money without using banks. And then, I do support things like barter. I support using cash as possible. But overall, like, we're building new systems, and none of us know exactly.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for sharing. This is really important because there are options to not participate, or at least reduce the amount of power that we're giving to these corporations every time we want to do a transaction. And we're remembering here, we're in a regenerative culture podcast. Regenerative culture means a culture that does not participate in degenerative systems, meaning if we're participating with part of the culture is buying clothing or any type of relationship that we have with transaction, that is it degenerating life, or is it regenerative? So part of the culture here is the economic system. And today we're talking about this, and especially that technocratic system, which involves our technology, and rephrasing here that technology doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's the way it's being used in order to control us even more, recording every data that they can. They have even our DNA system. It can redesign the whole thing. This crazy stuff that's happening. Can you tell us a little bit more of like, why is it so important to take action with this new economic system or build a new one, or tell me more?
Gotcha. Yeah, so I like the way that you really outline that in terms of like trying to do our best to make sure our actions are, or asking yourself, are my actions contributing to a degenerative culture or a regenerative culture? I think that's a good practice. And, in terms of why do we want to do these things? I mean, I find myself moving in this direction for many reasons. Obviously, again, what we were describing, waking up, you realize, oh my God, things are not running around the world the way I thought they were. I grew up innocently believing that governments are protecting us from bad people and poisons are not being put in my food and my water, et cetera, and that, again, the economic system works for everybody. There's nobody behind it manipulating. All these kind of assumptions we make, and once you kind of crack that veil and you realize that's not true, and the financial system is one of the major ways, if not the main way, that we are all manipulated around the world and kind of controlled, or at least attempted to be controlled. Once you realize that, then we have to move to a place of solution. So what are we going to do? We don't want to just complain. We want to create a new regenerative system, and especially in terms of economics. This is so important right now because the world that let's say kind of our mirror selves, the polar opposite side of this battle we're in, the people on the other side, they would like a world that is completely tracked and traced from cradle to grave. So the moment you're born, given a social security number or some sort of tax ID number, and the world that's coming into now, this world would involve giving children tablets from the moment they're born, facial recognition scanning. I just put out a report yesterday showing that here in Houston, they're starting to install these smart digital billboards all around different parts of town, and they say it's going to give you useful information. It's got Wi-Fi, but they've also got cameras attached to them that are recording at all times. Like, this is part of that world that they're trying to create, the Internet of Things, and eventually the Internet of Bodies, where everything, including us, is connected to this sort of next generation of the Internet. Not just a place you visit on the computer or on the phone, but the world around us completely interconnected. And you probably heard the phrase, data is the new oil. That's not just like a kind of a cliche catchphrase. It is the truth that these major corporations and governments see that every bit of data they can grab from us, whether that's from listening to us, watching our web surfing habits, and then learning about us, and then feeding that into AI, they value that data, the data that we produce and that we voluntarily give away, more than oil at this point, because they understand how it's going to help them not only make a lot of money off of us, but build a future that I don't think most of us who care about regenerative culture would want. Not a world where privacy is respected, not a world where individual liberty is respected, and as you mentioned earlier, brother, also a world where they not only want to survey us with cameras and stuff, but where they are getting now to the genetic level and wanting to be able to modify human beings down to the genetic level. They've been modifying our food down to the genetic level for years. And that's what this is really about. It's control down to our literal cells, down to our very beings, control of the food supply and the food production. We are witnessing the sort of second wave, or the continuation of a wave that began hundreds of years ago of colonization of Africa and the global south right now, under the guise of digital IDs being a human right via the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, all these groups that use certain language to talk about diversity and equity and looking out for indigenous people, etc. But when you really look at the truth of their programs, they are not about that. They are not regenerative. It's about more control, and it's a loss of individual liberty, a loss of us to make our own choices and our own free will. So understanding what they're trying to create, then we need to focus on what we want to create.
Yeah, man, definitely. It's so important to be aware of what's going on, not freak out. Definitely, also not being addicted to the information, because it could drain you. That's what's going on. The more you research it, the more you're gonna find out, and the scarier it's gonna get. However, there's some crazy stuff happening that's definitely way out of control, to a point that it definitely questions, like, why do we exist in this reality? And we might just get out and kill ourselves somehow. It happened to me, it happened to many of us in so many ways. So in order to understand the relationship that we have here with life, with our nature, with our reason to exist, then we take that action. So since all this is happening in the world, then why am I here for? Then what can I do to make it better? So we're talking about new forms of economy, which is the biggest one. So we stop giving power to these guys, which let's name them, okay? We got the World Economic Forum with Klaus Schwab, BlackRock, the Technocrats, Facebook, Google, and all these guys. And we definitely need to mention these because we need to know who they are and why they're doing, and follow them and check them out and realize that these agendas are true, and the action that will power us to take the action to create the world that we want to create. So a new economy is a big action, and taking it further, where do we work? How can we practice this economy? Where do I, please, what is your example of how you get income, and how can you have relationships with other people, creating a different form of economy?
Yeah, so I don't claim, of course, to have all the answers. This is why I'm always excited to meet people like yourself, because there's so many of us thinking about what comes next and thinking about what does a regenerative system look like, a regenerative economy. And like I said earlier, people who just recognize that the current systems aren't working for really any of us. And that gets me excited. What I've focused on, especially in the book, How to Opt Out the Technocratic State, which I will say is available to download for free at my website, theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. And if you go there, there's also a link to the audiobook you can listen for free, and a link to the Spanish version as well. And we just got yesterday the German translation, so we'll be releasing it in German soon too. So
Sweet.
information is out there. But what I focus on is really the ideas of building a counter economy or a parallel economy. And these ideas were promoted by a man, an activist named Samuel Konkin III. He passed away just about 20 years ago in 2004. And he basically was trying to he studied the collapse of the Soviet Union, he studied Peru, he studied other developing nations, and saw that no matter what the government did, especially when the government tried to become more restrictive and more regulative, that people would always find a way around it. And it wasn't always like a pretty way around it. But let's say, for example, he talks about in Peru, there was even way before Uber and Lyft, there was a lot of restrictions on who could be a taxi driver and who could transport people. But then the communities out there in what they called the informal economy, which was a definition of that would be the economy of people who trade and buy from each other outside of the mainstream economy, what Samuel Konkin called the white market or the mainstream economy, which means the white market would be, you're getting a check, taxes are being taken out of it, there's a record of it, all that stuff. The informal economy or the counter economy or the parallel economy or the underground economy is that the economic exchanges that take place between people and businesses that are either totally done in cash, or in our day it could be done in crypto as well, or barter, or some form that the government has no idea of and no awareness of. And Samuel Konkin started to study this around the world, and he found that actually the informal economy is the biggest economy in the world, trillions of dollars worth of money that is being exchanged, and probably more at this point, between people. And again, a lot of this in Africa, Mexico, South America, just through the so-called global South. There's a lot of places in these developing nations where people aren't in that mainstream economy yet. Now, of course, from the technocrats' view, the Klaus Schwabs of the world, the Bill Gates of the world, their answer is, this is why we need to come save everybody and get them all digital IDs so they're a part of the system. So they're promoting an ideology that says you're not really a person until you get your paperwork. And unfortunately, we've seen this in a lot of Latin and Hispanic communities, especially those who emigrate to the U.S., who kind of are pounded into their head that you're not a real person until you get your papers. And so a lot of people have been taught this idea that they should go into the system, and what we're trying to do is show people that there's power outside of the system. And that's what Samuel Konkin was saying is, okay, so if these people are buying and trading, and again with Peru, they had their own kind of taxi service that was an illegal, informal market that they created on their own. What would happen if people consciously chose to do that? Not just doing that because they're poor and because they're doing what they have to do to survive, but people, whether white Americans, middle class or whatever, but conscious people saying, I don't want to participate in those systems anymore because they don't align with my values, or because CBDCs are coming or whatever. And I think that's what we're witnessing today around the world, with more and more people kind of realizing they don't want to stay in these systems, but they're not sure where to go next. And this is what Samuel Konkin said would be the work of myself. I've tried to take on this, and many others out there who are trying to build whatever the next stages look like, so that these people who are desperately looking for a way out and a solution have somewhere to go to, into the informal economy, the counter economy, the parallel economy. And so Samuel Konkin predicted, he didn't predict dates, but he said, I imagine it would take 4 different phases for humanity to exit from being completely indoctrinated into the corporate state, banks, credit cards, student debt, all that stuff, to slowly making their way out, and then to building this kind of parallel system. His idea was, let's not try to overtake their systems or get ourselves into office and vote us for president and we're going to fix it. Let's just build something new. And that is something that has resonated with me for over a decade now. Like, it just makes sense in my heart. The idea that, like, when I look at these systems, especially I'm talking about the United States and even Mexico, I would say, I don't see systems that are really worth saving, so to speak. Like, I see systems that have been corrupted since the beginning, and I would rather put my energy into trying to create something new for the coming generations. And so that's really what I think is the solution when we're trying to, like, how do we get out of those systems? And you asked a little bit about my personal examples. As a journalist, as an independent journalist, I get paid mostly through crypto, but sometimes through US dollars, and I navigate that, but I don't get a check in the mail. I don't use a bank account to do that. And then my book, I outline different steps, like as step-by-step processes I could think of how to get yourself out of the banks, and different tools you can consider, what I call half measures, where you go from a big bank to a local credit union that's local to your community. That's still in that mainstream system, and they're still going to turn your money to CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, eventually. But that's a step away from the big corporate bank towards something more local. So don't be like, oh, I can't do anything because I'm not ready to go all the way. Take baby steps, do what you can to start getting away from these systems. And we, in the long term, I think we're building these parallel economies, these parallel systems. And that's what the Freedom Cell Network, the Greater Reset, that's how we've connected. This is really my life's work, I think, is trying to figure out how I can contribute to helping build that next stage, and working with people like yourself so that our children, or the children coming after them, the 7 generations and beyond, have that opportunity to decide, do I want to live in the smart city, facial recognition scanning, CBDC, whatever, or do I want to come over here in the permaculture paradises and learn from these people, right? Like, I think at the very least, what we owe to our ancestors and to the coming generations is to give them something, an alternative to choose from, and then they can make their own choices.
Right. I can see that. I see it happening, like I see a lot of people and movements and groups and collectives and eco villages making it happen. And so that second action or immediate action to take is meeting people that are in a similar road and building community. And I love one of the projects you guys, the Freedom Cell Network, which is awesome. Here in Orlando, we've been also building community, and we connected with a few people from the network. And the thing here is how to spread the word and connect with like-minded folks. And of course, it's not going to be easy. I come across a lot of groups that it's hard to trust people. It's going to go through drama and stuff like that. Why? Because we don't know how to share. We don't know how to communicate with each other, and we have to go through that, especially with ourselves and then with a collective, as the first phase while you're doing this new economic system parallel, because there's so many ways of economy. Don't marry just one, right? So it's just kind of like have a diversity of economy, and then building the group. From now is like the political side, and this is a good question, and I want to check your answer on this. I haven't voted in a long time in Ecuador. I vote because of an obligation, but I do nulo. Nulo means that you don't agree with any of the parties, and also the system. It's different from leaving it blank or writing blank. Blank is like that goes in favor of whoever needs the vote, but depending on the country. But nulo means like, okay, I don't agree with any of these. And if we register that you don't agree with any of this, over the years, we can see that the political system doesn't make any sense anymore, and this president and vice president and stuff like that. However, right now, and the question is, what do you think about Robert Kennedy coming up as president?
Yeah, so that's interesting. First, I never heard about that. So you can actually kind of register a vote that says, I don't support the system. That seems like if you're going to participate, right, that's the best thing you could do. I actually, when we were at the Greater Reset in January of this past year, in 2023, that's when I first found out that RFK was going to run because, we had Del Bigtree of the Highwire, and Del and them had already heard about it because Del's involved with his team. And so they kind of whispered and said, hey, guys, Robert F. Kennedy's going to announce in a couple months. I was like, wow, that'll be interesting. And I remember that was kind of my first thought is like, personally, I don't vote in presidential, federal elections. I don't even vote in state elections. And I've only recently started voting in local races where I think if people are going to put their energy into that system at all, it should be local. I think we have so little power, and I'm speaking specifically about the U.S., of course. Different countries have different things going on, but I think generally speaking, we have so little power. And again, with the U.S. system being so corrupted, it's hard to know, and we're already seeing that. I don't really believe that any true radical can get into office. I don't believe the storyline that Donald Trump somehow surprised people and got into office. I believe Trump is fully part of the system and controlled. At best is a kind of an unpredictable person who says things that the club doesn't really like, but ultimately he's more part of that club than me or you are, right? So that's kind of how I view that. So I don't really believe that anyone, whether it's a Ron Paul or a Bernie Sanders or a Robert F. Kennedy Jr., are going to be able to crack and get at that point. Now, that said, it definitely makes for some interesting, wow, we're in some interesting historic times. We have somebody who, he's the only person that could do it. We're a day or so after his announcing he is going to run independent now, right? So I respect that, because my problem I've had with both Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders and people who've tried to do these kind of things is they run within either the Republican or the Democratic Party, and then it becomes clear the party's going to screw them over and change the rules to keep them from, winning. Or they did the same thing to Ron Paul in 2012, Bernie again, and in Bernie's case, he ends up endorsing Hillary Clinton, endorsing Biden, and then there's all these people who they got all pumped up and excited, oh my God, real change. And either those people do just, okay, well, I guess I'll vote for Biden because he's better than the other guy, or they just become anarchists and they give up, which I guess is better. But I respect that RFK had the courage to say, you know what, they are trying to screw me over through the Democratic primary. I'm not just going to play that game and then kind of endorse Biden in the end, which I still hope he won't do. So to see him say, I'm going to gamble with going independent, not only is that a difficult road in the United States, third parties, even the Libertarian Party, which has ballot access in all 50 states, they still have trouble getting 4 or 5%, right? So it's hard to know, but the reason I say he's probably the only one who could do it is because he's already famous, independently, because of his family's name. That carries a lot of weight for some people. Even when he has brothers and sisters of his saying, hey, we have nothing to do with him, he's lost his mind. He is Robert F. Kennedy's son, and that still carries a lot of weight in the United States. Obviously, John F. Kennedy being his nephew doesn't hurt him either. It's going to be interesting. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be signing up and going to register to vote for him or anything like that. Personally, I'm not telling people not to do that. Do whatever you feel inclined. In some ways, maybe in the U.S., that's as close as a vote that you can come to protest the system, like you were describing, right? Maybe a vote for him is a way to say F you to the rest of the system. I don't think anything's going to happen, but I'm not going to give either of you my vote. I'd rather give it to this guy, right? So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how things turn out. One thing I can say, just while we're talking about the U.S. and elections, my advice to, I'm sure you're already on this train, but to anybody in the U.S., I don't plan to be in the U.S. in November 2024, because just like the last time, I think there's going to be some funky stuff that happens, because unfortunately, as much as I am an anarchist and I do want people to stop believing in these unsustainable degenerative systems, we don't have the new systems in place yet. There's not anything for us to bring people to just yet. So while on one side, there's a part of me that's yes, people are losing faith in the system. They don't trust elections anymore. They don't trust the media. There's a part of me that loves that and is grateful for that, because that, to me, I think the next step then is to show them how to think for themselves and all this sort of stuff. But at the moment, all that's doing is leading to chaos. And I'm not saying the answer is keep your faith in the institutions that have robbed us and are doing all kinds of horrible things. But my point is, I do think there's chaos ahead, especially for the United States. I think there's going to be some chaos before they get to that order that they love to create, So the elections are a great time to do it. And we're unfortunately in a time where the Biden people they're not going to accept the Trump win. They're going to, think it has to do with Russian hackers or this or that or whatever. And the Trump people are so convinced that they've been robbed already, a couple of times, that they're not going to accept anything less than that. And then obviously you got the group of people who don't believe any of it and maybe are going to go for RFK. To me, that just spells recipe for like post-election, just like we saw at the last election, the first U.S. election, where they like couldn't tell us who won for a week or whatever. Like that never happened before. Those are the kind of things that people say those only happen in banana republics and developing nations. Like they would look down on South America for example, and say, oh, that doesn't happen in the U.S. That happens in Brazil or whatever, right? Well, here we are. Those kind of things are happening in the United States, and I don't think that's an immediate good thing. I think in the long term, it's what has to happen spiritually. Like, it's gotta happen. But I do pray for everybody because I think it's going to be a tough road, like as we get through those, whatever's coming.
For sure, man. Unpredictable, but we can anticipate things by the patterns of that's been happening. Just we don't need to like do much research. Just by observing our surroundings, we can tell like things are collapsing basically. And so then what are we gonna do about it? A lot of people don't care. It's like, oh, I'm living my life, and that's it. And that's great. And I appreciate that for sure. You have to take care of yourself for sure. But at the same time, we're here for each other, and do a little bit of both for yourself and for each other. I think is basically our reason to exist here. So taking this further, brother, we have the Greater Reset 5 coming up next January. It's an amazing event. We were grateful to be part of it on this year in January 2023. And we are happy to be part of it because this is not only informative about what's happening in the world, but sharing solutions of many people taking some radical, crazy action that's really revolutionizing what life is here and the systems that we live in. So thank you very much for building that structure that's very successful. Thank you. That you got the Greater Reset, you got the Freedom Cell Network. You also have the Agora Eco Village coming up as well. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? What's what's going on with it? How can we participate? Anybody that wants to be involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'll mention, because I don't think I said it earlier, the Freedom Cells Network you mentioned that twice now, is the website is freedomcells.org, CELLS.org. And if anybody hearing this is in a position where you're still looking for your local community, it's just a platform we've created. It looks like, a stereotypical social media platform with profiles and timelines and groups and all that. But the real purpose is to help you go on there, put your location. Don't give us your home address. We don't want your home address, but somewhere near where you live. And then you can search and find how many people live within 20 kilometers or how many groups are near me. And a lot of people have made some good connections through there. If you don't find anyone in your area, feel free to create a new group, sort of plant that flag and say, hey, I'm here. I'm looking for like-minded people who want to grow food or who want to do homeschooling or whatever your interests are. And they will come. I promise you they will come, because we're constantly promoting this event, promoting the website Freedom Cells. And we've got 40,000 plus people now on the website. Just as of last week, we officially passed that number. And we've been, there's tens of thousands on Telegram and who knows where else. People call it Freedom Cells, call it circles, hubs, hive, pods, whatever. The goal, though, is just these local decentralized groups coming together. So that is a big part of what I believe in will help us get to that counter economy, that new system that we're talking about. And again, part of that too is if we want to build parallel economic systems and we want to build parallel education systems, because we realize the current systems don't work and have indoctrination of all kinds of stuff. That's the approach that I personally try to take, is if I see a problem, yes, protest it if necessary, if it'll serve some value, if it's important for us to get out there and express ourselves. But don't just be reactive, be proactive. Here's the problem. Okay, well, I'm going to try to create this solution for it. And oftentimes, for us, we found that the solution is to counter what the other side, so to speak, is doing. So the World Economic Forum, they meet every January for 5 days in Davos, Switzerland, which is one of the most expensive places in the world and one of the most expensive countries in the world. And they meet for 5 days with CEOs and presidents and prime ministers and journalists and all kinds of different people, heads of think tanks and NGOs and nonprofits, come together to discuss all kinds of things. I mean, I'm not here to say that every single person who meets there is a part of the plan. I think this is how they've been so successful, is they've convinced most of the people that they're just good people out there trying to do good for the world. But there are others who are very conscious that, again, their vision is that technocratic vision we described earlier, top-down control. And so in 2020, after the COVID panic began, when the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab announced the Great Reset. He published a book called The Great Reset that he said that COVID had provided the opportunity to reset capitalism and to remake all the world systems and things like that, which is a statement I kind of agree with. I think it is time, to remake. We just have different visions of how to go about that. They want this top-down control. What we decided was, you know what, let's not let our freedom, health, truth communities out here be living in paranoia and fear of the Great Reset, which we felt a lot of it in 2020. Let's come together and let's counter them. Let's offer a parallel to them. So they want to meet in January for 5 days. Let's meet in January for 5 days. And let's talk about similar topics: food, health, mental, physical, spiritual health. Let's talk about building new systems. Let's talk about growing food, all these different ideas. And do it, though, from a grassroots, bottom-up, people-powered perspective. And we really, truly, and I think this is becoming true with each edition of the Greater Reset, we truly aim for this to be an international event. We don't want it to just be a U.S. or even a North America thing. So we're trying to work with people, speakers, bringing speakers from around the world. We've got people tuned in from around the world, and for 5 days we come together for solutions focus. Like you said, we do touch on the problems, some of the why, but for the most part, this event is exclusively geared towards giving anybody out there who sees what's happening, who understands what's happening, even if you have a vague understanding, you just know things are going in a bad direction, you're looking for answers. This is the event for you. The website is thegreaterreset.org, thegreaterreset.org, and it happens January 17th to the 21st, 2024. So I think we're just 3 months away in Morelia, Mexico, in Michoacan. And we have a beautiful venue space, big green space. We're going to be not in the same big theater that you remember from this year, but similar building right in that same beautiful green space. And I mean, I was so just honored to have you guys participate and just all the new energy that came in for this event. As I said, we started this in the beginning of COVID. Our first event was January 2021, and we had 85 people showed up to Ziwa in the middle of this lockdown all around the world, and we were grateful just to have that. And half the speakers were virtual, of course, because nobody could travel. Well, now we're at a point where most of us can travel again, and we just have this amazing lineup of speakers, again, solutions focused every day, January 17th to the 21st. And then even for those who can't come in person, we stream the event for free. Personally, for me, I'm very conscious of our brothers and sisters that are in the community who might not have an extra $10 to spend to, do anything, let alone buy a plane ticket, get to a hotel or rent an Airbnb and come down to Mexico. I get that. I value that. We understand that. So we keep the stream totally available for free. We load all the talks and put out all the talks available for free. We also are not an event that's just trying to market to rich Americans in English. Our event is totally free for Mexicans. The live event in person is streamed where Mexicans or Spanish speakers can come up and get headsets for free, and they can hear the entire presentations in Espanol so that they don't miss out on anything, because we really are trying to grow an international global movement here. And to me, these are just this is worth all that effort, that time to put in there, just to make it where people can really tap in and tune in and be involved. So yeah, thegreaterreset.org.
The Greater Reset is awesome, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is the 5th edition. This is our second time coming up with my wife. We're going to be sharing about regenerative culture, and it's an exciting time. So I think there's a lot of solutions around the world, and it's up to us to decide to make it happen. So thank you so much for creating that space, man. Is there anything else you can say to the youth that you talked about your times as a youth, and some message that you want to share to the youth right now? Yeah,
absolutely, brother. And thank you again for having me on and for giving me the chance to share about my work and ideas, and to be on this journey with both you and your wife. I know that me and my partner Miriam both appreciate being able to collaborate with you guys. And you ask about a message to the youth. This is something that's becoming increasingly important to me as I get a little bit older. I'm 38 now, and I have a younger brother that's 13 years younger than me. I have nieces and nephews that are all 14 and under, and just really trying to figure out how do we connect to the next coming generations. And and keep them on a good path and not falling for false solutions and all those kind of things. I would just say to any younger person who might hear this that what is most important is to be true to yourself, no matter what the outside world around you is telling you, no matter if the outside world is telling you what you believe in is wrong. Of course, be open, be a critical thinker, have an open mind, be willing to listen and to learn from your elders, of course. But when you know what's true in your heart, stick with that and be willing to fight for that. And also just know that life can be very intense when you're younger. I know it was for me. And with time, things seem to be a little bit more easier to manage. And so if things feel intense or difficult or hard for you wherever you're at in your life, just know that truly that will pass, and that everything will pass, with time. Just be able to experience everything that's coming your way, knowing that it's meant for you, and that all the lessons that come your way are the lessons that were intended for you, so you could grow into being the person that you're meant to be.
Exactly, man. Thank you so much. It's like making the decision that we make is our learning experience. Sometimes we think it's the worst decision we made, and it's actually something that helped us learn something really important. So the greater reset for me has been a lot of help. Definitely connected with beautiful people over there. I would love to see more youth as well there too. I think it's really important for us to really create new platforms of education as well, because the education also is creating more of that same system, is it replicating the conventional capitalist system. So we want to kind of switch that or create a parallel alternative. And so, thank you so much, hermano, for doing this. I love what you're doing, Ramiro, and also John Bush over there. I think appreciate the good crew. I know the girls too. Your wife, Medium, and the rest of the feminine energy, and making it happen as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's connect more so we can expand this network of regeneration for life. And peace, man, hermano. I love you so much. I love myself too. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Much love.